This film is inspired by the real-life events surrounding Whitey Bulger during the 1970s. He was a notorious figure from South Boston, the sibling of a senator, and a violent criminal who became an informant for the FBI to aid in cracking down on gangs and dismantling the mafia within his territory. The story opens with Kevin Weeks being questioned by Agent Eric Olson. Kevin insists to Eric that he is not an informant, while Agent Olson reminds him that he faces accusations of kidnapping, extortion, and racketeering. Additionally, Kevin is implicated as an accessory to murder, facing very serious allegations. Agent Eric inquires if Kevin is there to negotiate a deal with the federal authorities, suggesting that Kevin intends to testify against some of the most infamous and brutal criminals and serve as an informant. Eric urges Kevin to share all he knows about the Winter Hill Gang, the FBI, and John Connolly, specifically, requesting information about Kevin's former boss and now fugitive James Whitey Bulger. Kevin agrees to reveal everything he knows regarding the gang's activities. The narrative flashes back to Boston in 1975, where Kevin Weeks is seen working as a bouncer outside a bar, employed by his boss and friend James Whitey Bulger. He blocks a man from entering the establishment who claims to be a friend of Jimmy. Despite the man's insistence, Kevin refuses him entry, recalling a disturbance the previous Saturday night and suggesting he try another bar. The situation escalates when the man strikes Kevin, prompting him to retaliate. Meanwhile, James Whitey Bulger is shown preparing a bowl of nuts while listening to John Martirano, a member of his gang who is chatting with others about a girl. Bulger becomes irritated with John for repeatedly putting his fingers in the bowl after licking them, affecting everyone who has to eat from it. John apologizes to Bulger, who then steps outside after learning about an issue unfolding. He witnesses 3 individuals attacking Kevin Weeks. One of the attackers, Charlie, is Bulger's cousin and the very man who tried to enter the bar. Bulger admonishes Charlie, telling him to stop assaulting Kevin, and physically slaps him to snap him back to reality. Kevin realizes that the man he was fighting, Charlie, is married to one of Bulger's cousins. The following day, James Whitey Bulger approached Kevin Weeks, instructing him to sit in the front and drive. Another individual affiliated with the Angulo crime family was already in the car. They paused near the shoreline, and the man inquired whether they were scheduled to meet Camilio and questioned the reason for stopping there. Kevin Weeks apologized to Whitey Bulger, while Bulger suddenly began to assault the passenger. Bulger motioned to Kevin, and together they violently attacked the man, leaving him for dead. Bulger later expressed to Kevin that he appreciated the qualities he saw in him. He then introduced Kevin to Joey Angulo. Kevin informed Agent Eric Olson that he was pleased to be a part of the Winter Hill Gang. When Agent Olson asked about Kevin's role in the gang, Kevin explained that he handled minor daily tasks like deliveries, pickups, and other small jobs, including listening to Mickey's ramblings. James Bulger, along with Kevin, Mickey Maloney, and other members, visited the neighborhood and met an elderly woman named Mrs. Cody, who was delighted to see him. She inquired about his release from Alcatraz, and he replied that it had been about a decade. He asked if she remembered Mickey and Kevin, and she joyfully interacted with them. Bulger instructed Mickey to take care of Mrs. Cody's needs. Kevin told Agent Olson that Bulger was well regarded in his community. Agent Olson asked whether they included John Connolly in their circle. Kevin responded that Connolly grew up in the projects and had a close bond with Billy Bulger, Whitey's brother, who lived nearby. Kevin recounted that John Connolly had once been attacked by someone, and Whitey Bulger came to his rescue. He also mentioned to Agent Olson that Connolly was an outstanding police officer with exceptional shooting skills. John Connolly has a conversation with Billy Bulger, the sibling of James Whitey Bulger, who is now a senator. John inquired whether to address Billy as Billy or Senator, and Billy responded that he is the one feeling eager since John Connolly is regarded as an FBI hero. Billy asked John about his wife, Mary Ann, and John replied that she is doing well. James and Billy have known John since they were kids. During lunch, John attempted to gather information regarding James Whitey Bulger from Billy, but Billy was quite reserved about discussing him. John informed Billy that James Whitey Bulger and his Winter Hill Gang were involved in questionable activities, which made Billy upset, as he insisted he was not involved in James's affairs. John Connolly revealed to Billy that he had received instructions to eliminate the mafia factions and mentioned that Jimmy and Steve Flemmi were encroaching on their numbers. He tried to persuade Billy to ally with him in his mission to dismantle the Winter Hill Mafia, but Billy declined to take his card. John asked Billy to relay a message to James Whitey Bulger to which Billy replied that if Jimmy wanted to contact John, he would manage to do so, and extended an invitation for John to come to his house. John has established a strong reputation within the FBI. John returned to his house and discovered his wife, Mary Ann, in the kitchen. She inquired if he had saved Boston, and while growing closer to her, he responded that he was making efforts to save the city. She mentioned that Hoover was counting on him to achieve great things, so John needed to put in a lot of effort before lifting her up. James Whitey Bulger visited his mother's house to spend some time with her. She asked him about his workday, and he replied that he was tired from work while giving her a warm greeting. His mother insisted that he play a game of gin rummy with her, stating he owed her $56. They played together, and she teased him about not learning anything during his prison time, especially how to play the game. Billy joined them for dinner and mentioned that an elderly woman named Burke had passed away in the street. Jimmy then announced that he was going to bed, but Billy stopped him to ask if he remembered a young John Connolly. He informed Jimmy that John was now an FBI agent and was looking for him. John Connolly had noted the crimes committed by Gennaro Angiulo, and there were no witnesses available. Suddenly, John received a call that made him leave in a hurry. It appeared the call had come from James Whitey Bulger, who was seen waiting in a car at night. John Connolly met with James, who gave him 2 minutes to express what he wanted to say. John warned Whitey that Gennaro Angiulo was planning to kill him, and he felt certain about it. James responded by saying that John knew what he did to informants, but John clarified that they were allies, not informants. James questioned what connection there was between him and the FBI. John suggested that he could assist James, and in return, James could help him by providing information and becoming an informant to take down the mobs, particularly the Angiulos. John emphasized that he was not looking to clean up Southie. He loved Boston and was focused on the North End, determined to dismantle the organized crime groups. James listened to John's proposal but ultimately walked away without giving him a response, stating that the 2 minutes he had granted were up. Whitey was not keen on the idea of being an informant for the FBI. James Whitey Bulger approaches Lindsay Sear and greets her as Miss America. Jimmy inquires about his son, to which Lindsay replies that he is resting upstairs. Jimmy decides he will go wake him up. At the dinner table, he encourages his son to finish the juice he left behind and asks what occurred at school. The boy shares that a kid named Timmy constantly bothers him and even took his coloring pencils, so he responded by hitting him in the face. Jimmy praises his son but advises him against hitting others in front of peers, as that could lead to trouble. Lindsay interjects, stating that it's not a proper lesson to impart, but Jimmy ignores her and the child follows his father's advice. Officer Flynn stops the car belonging to James Whitey Bulger. Tommy, a member of the Winter Hill gang, becomes upset with the officer for pulling them over, believing the stop must have a hidden motive related to a message from the mafia. Officer Flynn informs Bulger that he has a communication from Gary Angiulo, who sends his best to Jimmy. The officer relays that Gary warned him to refrain from finding his associate beaten and left for dead in a parking lot. It would be wise for Bulger to avoid causing more trouble for Angiulo. Additionally, the officer cautions Jimmy that any further issues with Gary would lead to even greater consequences. After hearing Officer Flynn's words, Tommy becomes annoyed while James threatens the officer with harsher words. Frustrated, Tommy expressed his anger at the bar to fellow gang members, declaring his intent to murder the officer he had never trusted. However, James Whitey Bulger intervened, urging Tommy to refrain from harming any police officer. This infuriated Tommy even more, and a scuffle seemed imminent until another gang member stepped in to defuse the situation. Meanwhile, John Mortorano was being questioned by an FBI agent regarding his position as the chief executioner and the most feared individual in the Winter Hill gang. Mortorano affirmed this claim when asked. The agent further probed whether it was true Mortorano had killed around 20 people, to which Mortorano acknowledged as accurate. The FBI agent requested a clear explanation from Mortorano about the reasons for the escalating conflict between Winter Hill and Angiulo. Mortorano explained that it was a territorial matter concerning control over South Boston. He also informed the agent that Angiulo sought dominance over various illegal activities, including loan sharking and vending machines. A flashback to 1975 depicted Mickey Maloney being executed by Angiulo, who fired multiple shots at him using a sniper rifle. Fellas and Jimmy approached Tommy, asking him about a suitcase. When Tommy inquired about its purpose, Fellas revealed that Mickey had been set up. Another gang member informed Jimmy that he had seen Mickey Maloney on Winter Hill a few hours earlier. Tommy grabbed his vest and accompanied them. During their walk, Tommy apologized to Jimmy for crossing the line the previous night at Triple O's bar, and Jimmy reassured him that it was understandable since he was intoxicated. They made amends, and Jimmy advised Tommy to watch out for Angulo, to which Tommy agreed. Just as Tommy was shaking hands with Jimmy, John Mortorano shot him in the head, an act they had conspired about in advance. Jimmy remarked that Tommy's vest hadn't protected him, and they then placed Tommy's body in the trunk. FBI agents questioned Kevin Weeks and John about the murder of Tommy. They explained that Jimmy believed Tommy might have informed Angulo about Mickey, leading to his death. Possibly due to their earlier conflict, Jimmy and others disposed of Tommy's remains beneath a bridge in the Neponset River. James Whitey Bulger reached out to John Connolly, who outlined his strategy for dismantling the mafia and targeting Angulo to his supervisor Charles McGuire and colleague Robert Fitzpatrick. John attempted to convince Charles that there was a prime opportunity to take down the mob since Jimmy was willing to become an informant. However, Charles expressed skepticism about John's ability to succeed against the gangsters they were pursuing. John also corrected Charles, noting that Jimmy's name was not Whitey, but simply Jimmy. Charles mentioned his lack of faith in Jimmy's cooperation, viewing the Winter Hill members as untrustworthy. John replied that he had a strong relationship with both Billy and Jimmy, insisting their friendship would remain intact. He assured Charles that if Jimmy gave his word, he would follow through. Despite this, Charles and Robert remained unsupportive and asked for John Morris's perspective. John Morris sided with Connolly, stating the potential benefits outweighed any risks. John Connolly designated James Whitey Bulger as a top informant for the FBI. Whitey laid out his conditions to Connolly, specifying that he would not harm his friends or business associates, clarifying that he wouldn't be ratting, but rather viewing this as a business arrangement that would benefit both parties. John agreed to these terms and assured Whitey that nobody would interfere or monitor him, provided he supplied the FBI with valuable intelligence and significant arrests. John Connolly informed Whitey that the only condition from the FBI was that he must refrain from committing any murders from that point forward. In the current situation, an FBI agent inquired with Kevin Weeks about whether he was aware that James Whitey Bulger was acting as an informant. Kevin replied that he had no such knowledge, explaining that James had a strong disdain for informants. He mentioned that he knew James had connections within the FBI and various sources of information, believing that James might just be toying with them as he had in the past, although James had his own agenda. Steve spotted James Whitey Bulger doing pull-ups and questioned how he managed to have that much energy. James then asked Steve if he could trust him, to which Steve assured him that he could. James revealed to Steve that he was negotiating with the FBI or an alliance. Steve reacted with anger, accusing James of becoming an informant. James responded by stating that he was making deals to dismantle the crime organizations that needed to be taken down. In return, he would also gain advantages because the FBI would handle their enemies, allowing them to avoid direct confrontation, with the FBI providing protection. Steve grasped the arrangement and indicated his agreement. James also mentioned John Connolly, explaining that they had grown up together and that he can be trusted. James Whitey Bulger returned home to find his girlfriend informing him that their child, Douglas, was unwell with a slight fever. He inquired why she hadn't taken him to see a doctor. During a Christmas dinner attended by several politicians, Billy made a good impression on them and asked Marianne how she was adjusting to life in Boston. She replied that she was starting to enjoy living there and noted that the community feels quite close-knit. Billy reassured Marianne that it wasn't an issue and that Mary would help her meet new people. James was also present at the dinner. John Connolly expressed his happiness to Steve that he would be accompanying him and James Whitey Bulger, which would simplify things for him. Billy informed James Whitey Bulger that he needed to take a phone call. James learned that Douglas's condition had deteriorated and that he was in the hospital. Upon arriving at the hospital, he was told by Lindsay that Douglas was suffering from Reyes syndrome. With tears in her eyes, Lindsay explained to James White that she initially thought it was the flu and had called the doctor, who suggested giving Douglas aspirin, but his condition worsened, and he began to act out angrily toward Lindsay. James tried to soothe Lindsay, who insisted that the aspirin had made Douglas's situation worse. Jimmy expressed his desire to take Douglas home, but she explained that they couldn't because he was on life support. Lindsay understood that Douglas was now brain dead and could not recover, but she struggled to convey this to James Whitey Bulger, who refused to accept it. Lindsay then stated that she would disconnect the life support herself to ease Douglas's suffering, which enraged Jimmy. He accused her of being cold and called her a murderer, deeply hurting Lindsay, who left the room in tears. Fueled by anger, James Whitey Bulger overturned the table. Currently, FBI agents have requested Steve Flemmi to provide details about James Bulger's life after the passing of his son Douglas and when his operations grew, leading him to become the crime leader of Boston. They jump ahead to 1981, where Steve recounts to the agents that at that time, James Whitey Bulger had taken control of the Winter Hill Gang, thriving by broadening their business activities and forming numerous connections. Following Douglas's death, James separated from Lindsay and accumulated significant wealth. Steve also mentioned their journey to Miami, where they were entering the sci-fi business along with John Callahan and Brian Halloran, emphasizing that Jimmy had little faith in Brian. In fact, Brian Halloran had displayed a violent side by killing 2 of his drug dealers publicly before departing. Jimmy had concerns about trusting Brian, yet he still required his assistance to secure the deal. Robert Fitzpatrick expressed his frustration to John Connolly, noting that the Winter Hill Gang was operating freely in South Boston without fear of repercussions. He questioned why they had not yet obtained any substantial information regarding Angulo. John responded that they needed to be patient. In anger, Robert instructed John to have the Winter Hill Gang investigate Angulo's headquarters, insisting that he needed concrete evidence for the federal prosecutor, giving John a deadline of just 2 weeks. John advised James Whitey Bulger to locate Angulo's whereabouts, pointing out that their base keeps shifting to the north end and stressing the need for the exact location to ensure wiretaps could be set up. Without this, he could no longer protect the Winter Hill Gang. Jimmy agreed to provide the information on the condition that John arrange for all the vending machines owned by Angulo. With no alternatives, John conceded to this demand. James outlined what needed to be done and offered some evidence to John Connolly. In return, John willingly shared the details of Angulo family's headquarters with his colleagues Robert and John Morris. Additionally, John mentioned that in the barbershop James referenced, he had seen Mikey Angulo, Bobby Carosa, and Vincent the Animal Ferrara enter. This revelation shocked them all. Feeling a sense of accomplishment, John relayed the information to his boss, Charles, conveying that James Whitey Bulger was an invaluable asset for their operations. Steve disclosed to the FBI agents that James Whitey Bulger always had a strategy, such as giving them the address of Angulo at 98 Prince Street, demonstrating cleverness in having John Connolly manage the problems Winter Hill was facing in Florida. World Jai announced their new ownership, introducing Roger Wheeler as the CEO and Chief Operating Officer. He aims to grow the operation in South Florida, and John Callahan has agreed to assist him. Meanwhile, James Whitey Bulger and his associates discussed how Wheeler was problematic for them since he was making it simpler to track the cash flow and receipts, creating issues for the Winter Hill Gang. The gang devised a scheme to eliminate him. James Whitey Bulger handed Brian Halloran a bag containing $20,000 to persuade him not to proceed with the hit on Wheeler and instructed him to stay quiet about their discussion and not get involved. Brian accepted the cash and left cheerfully. James then expressed his frustration to his crew, instructing them not to pass the money to James White in public, and one of his members apologized to Whitey Bulger. John Martirano tracked down Roger Wheeler and shot him immediately after Wheeler finished his weekly golf session, acting on the orders from James Whitey Bulger. John Morris informed others about the murder carried out by Winter Hill, but John Connolly suggested he ignore it, stating that Bulger was giving them significant benefits and that to uncover larger truths, they sometimes had to lie. Connolly assured Morris that he would take care of it himself. Brian became furious upon hearing the news, feeling enraged, and approached the authorities to express his willingness to reveal the truth if they could offer him protection. Brian Halloran admitted to the FBI, in the presence of John Connolly, that Bulger had conspired to kill Roger Wheeler from Jai in Tulsa. He also disclosed that Bulger had paid him $20,000 to remain silent. John and Morris falsely claimed they were unaware that Bulger was responsible for Wheeler's murder. John inquired of Brian about the murder weapon, and Brian informed the FBI that John Martirano was the one who killed Wheeler, adding that he did not know anything about the weapon. Brian Halloran recounted the entire situation and insisted he was not involved. John Connolly, wanting to shield Bulger, coerced Brian Halloran into confessing to the murders of 2 drug dealers at a Chinese restaurant. Connolly expressed doubt about Halloran's words, labeling him as a drug addict and John Morris concurred with him. John then met with Bulger at the Boston Independence Day celebrations, where he questioned whether Bulger had killed Roger Wheeler. Bulger denied any involvement in Wheeler's death. Connolly informed Bulger that he was aware of Bulger's connections to World Jai and his complicity in the new owner's murder. Bulger responded defensively, asking Connolly how he was aware of Bulger's ties to World Jai. While in a car, Brian Halloran was shot multiple times by Bulger. Connolly faced scrutiny for allegedly leaking Halloran's status as a witness and his whereabouts. Angered, Connolly confronted Charles, demanding to know why he was being blamed when he was striving to dismantle the Italian mafia with Bulger's assistance. A heated exchange occurred between Connolly and Charles McGuire, who ordered that Bulger and Steve Flemy's roles as FBI informants must come to an end. Connolly resisted Charles's orders, but Charles ignored him. Meanwhile, they intercepted wiretaps, revealing the Angiulos' illegal drug dealings and related activities involving pimps and prostitutes. As a result, the Angiulos were apprehended. Connolly gained recognition at work for his role in dismantling the Angiulo case, earning him the title of mafia hunter, while Bulger faced diminished competition. John Martirano is questioned by FBI agents about whether he and John Connolly were in Miami during the spring of 1982, to which he confirms they were. He mentions that they celebrated the arrest of Angiulo and the bond between John Connolly and Whitey Bulger, along with his Winter Hill associates, became stronger during that time. At a party, John Callahan is murdered by some of Jimmy's men and placed in the trunk of a car. An FBI agent asks Steve Flemmy to verify if he shot John Callahan in the head on the night of the gathering, and Steve confirms that it is true, adding that John Connolly is aware of this as well. Marianne questions John Connolly about his new suit and gold watch, noting that he seems to be changing since becoming involved with Jimmy Bulger, leading to an argument where John Connolly consistently sides with James Whitey Bulger. John Connolly attends the funeral of James Whitey Bulger's mother after her passing, and later, Bulger meets with Joe Cahill to strike a significant deal concerning weapons. John Connolly hears that a new district attorney, Fred Wyshak, has moved into the Boston FBI headquarters. He attempts to connect with him by offering 2 tickets to a Red Sox game, but Wyshak declines, expressing more interest in understanding how Whitey has managed to avoid being captured by the police for so long. Stevie becomes infatuated with his stepdaughter, which angers James Bulger, who calls Stevie Flemmy sick for his feelings. Nonetheless, Stevie ignores the warning, and the girl is a prostitute. Whitey and Steve pick up Deborah, Stevie's prostitute stepdaughter, from the police station. After asking her if she talked to the police, she assures him that she denied any information that could implicate Whitey regarding drugs or crimes, and she denied witnessing anything. Trusting her, Whitey takes her to an apartment where he strangles her to death in front of Steve. James Whitey Bulger dines with John Connolly, Steve Flemmy, and John Morris at John's home. Whitey compliments the steak prepared by John Morris and inquires about the marinade. Morris claims it's a family secret, but Whitey playfully pressures him to reveal it. Morris eventually discloses the ingredients. Whitey comments on how Morris easily gave up the secret, suggesting that if he could do that, he might reveal more about Whitey. Morris appears frightened as Whitey's demeanor shifts, but then Whitey laughs, brushing it off as a joke. He then questions John about Marianne's absence, to which John responds that she isn't feeling well. Whitey heads to her room to have a discussion, scolding her for not mingling with her husband's friends and for behaving threateningly, which intimidates her. This situation plays a role in her eventual change of feelings towards John. John McIntyre, who serves as an informant for the Winter Hill gang, is betrayed by his gang due to his dealings with the IRA, resulting in him being beaten and killed by them. Conditions worsen for both the Winter Hill gang and John Connolly when Charles McGuire and Wyshak investigate John's interactions with James Whitey Bulger. Morris shares what he knows about the connection between Whitey and John to gain immunity. Steve Flemmy, John Martirano, and Kevin Weeks are all apprehended, while John Connolly pleads with the authorities to allow him to exit his house with dignity, a request that is ultimately denied. Billy, sitting in his living room, learns about James Whitey Bulger, who calls him to say goodbye before fleeing. Kevin, Weeks, and John Martirano receive their sentences but eventually regain their freedom and walk around Boston openly. Billy becomes president but is forced to step down due to his continued contact with his brother. John Connolly is sentenced to 40 years in prison, and James Whitey Bulger, who had been on the run for 16 years, is arrested outside a hotel in 2011. And you could arrest the nice stories on the right by simply clicking on them. Don't forget to subscribe for future uploads and grab your popcorn. Enjoy yourself and see you soon, my friend.